When you hear the word guillotine, a very specific visceral image probably flashes in your mind, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you picture Marie Antoinette angry mobs filling the cobblestone streets of Paris.
Yeah, exactly. The chaotic, blood-soaked violence of the French Revolution. It stands in our collective memory as, the ultimate symbol of state terror.
Right, it's a terrifying image.
But what if you learned that this terrifying machine, this towering wooden frame with its heavy angled blade, what if you learned it was actually invented as an instrument of profound mercy?
It's just one of history's ultimate paradoxes. I mean, the intention behind the design of the guillotine and the grim reality of what it eventually became, they are light years apart.
Totally. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. We're doing a deep dive into the historical records to trace the wildly contradictory history of the guillotine.
It's a wild ride.
It really is. Our mission here is to explore this wild paradox. We want to trace how an Enlightenment tool, one that was genuinely designed to democratize death, morphed into this mascot for political purging.
And how it shockingly survived well into the 20th century, which I think surprises a lot of people.
Oh, for sure. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand how a decapitation machine could ever be considered humane, we first have to talk about the gruesome reality of what came before it.
Yeah, humane is always a relative term, right? You really have to look at the baseline of the era.
Right. What was the status quo?
Well, before the French Revolution, capital punishment in France, and really across most of Europe, it was heavily class-based.
Meaning the rich got one treatment and the poor got another.
Exactly. The way you died was a direct reflection of your social hierarchy. So if you were a member of the nobility, you were afforded the privilege, I guess you could call it, of a relatively quick death by beheading.
Usually with a sword or an axe.
Right. But even that was a massive gamble.
Yeah, the sources point out that families of a condemned noble would sometimes literally bribe the executioner.
Oh, yeah. They'd pay them to sharpen the blade beforehand just to ensure it took only one swing.
Which is so grim to think about. Because if the executioner was unskilled, or, if the axe was dull, or the condemned moved even an inch,
it often took 2, 3, or even more agonizing blows to actually finish the job. It was messy.
But as horrific as a botched beheading sounds, the commoners had it significantly worse.
Oh, much worse. For the lower classes, execution wasn't just about ending a life. It was about inflicting maximum physical suffering.
And making a very long, drawn-out public spectacle of that suffering.
Right. Commoners were usually hanged, and depending on the rope and the drop, that could take many agonizing minutes of slow strangulation.
Or they faced even more grisly fates, like being burned alive at the stake,
yeah,
or the breaking wheel, which, I think is one of those brutal things we came across in the research.
It's truly awful.
Imagine you're in a public square, and you have to watch someone tied to a large wagon wheel, and an executioner systematically uses an iron bar to shatter every major bone in their body.
One by one.
One by one. And then the victim was just left there, woven through the spokes of the wheel, to die of shock or dehydration over hours or even days. It is just brutally visceral.
It's horrifying. So that was the terrifying status quo. And into this nightmare steps Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotine.
Right.
It's October 1789, so we're in the early, hopeful days of the French Revolution. And Dr. Guillotine pitches a radical idea to the National Assembly.
And interestingly, he was actually a staunch opponent of the death penalty.
He was, yeah, but he realized he couldn't abolish it entirely. So he proposed a simple mechanical device to decapitate all condemned people equally, swiftly, and without pain.
It's like he was trying to upgrade the societal operating system.
That's a good way to put it.
Society was running on these clunky, agonizing, error-prone manual processes, and he wanted to install a highly efficient automated system.
Right.
He was essentially trying to democratize death, ensuring everyone, regardless of their tax bracket or social standing, got the premium treatment.
The underlying philosophy here is crucial to understand, too. This was the Enlightenment.
Right. Big philosophical shifts happening.
Exactly. There were radical new ideas circulating about human rights and the inherent dignity of man. The philosophy of justice was fundamentally shifting.
Away from torture.
Right. Under this new Enlightenment thinking, the goal of capital punishment was simply to end a life as a legal consequence, not to inflict unnecessary pain or torture.
So having one standard painless method for everyone, from a peasant to a king, that was seen as a profound expression of equality among citizens.
It was a very democratic ideal, in a dark way.
Wait, I'm struggling with the word egalitarian in this context.
So,
Well, does standardizing and automating death actually make a society more equal? Or does it just grease the wheels for the state to kill at scale?
oh, that's the big question.
Because by removing the gruesome physical effort and the visual torture from the executioner's job, don't you just lower the psychological barrier to deploying the ultimate punishment?
That is the pivotal tension of this entire history. By sanitizing the process, they inadvertently industrialized it.
Right.
When the state no longer has to stomach the hours-long horror of the breaking wheel, the state finds it much easier to issue death sentences.
Which brings us to the bizarre engineering of the machine itself.
Yeah, the actual building of it.
Because the idea for a humane death was pitched by Dr. Guillotine, but we have to debunk a major myth right off the bat.
A huge myth.
Dr. Guillotine didn't actually invent the machine that bears his name.
He did not.
And contrary to popular legend, he didn't die by it either. He died of natural causes years later.
His name just became the eponym because he championed the legislation so passionately. The actual prototype was built by a bizarrely diverse committee.
I love this part.
You had Antoine Louis, who was a prominent French surgeon and the physician to the king, and they hired a German engineer named Tobias Schmidt to actually construct the physical prototype.
But Tobias Schmidt wasn't just an engineer, though. He was a harpsichord maker.
Right, he made instruments.
You have a surgeon, a king's physician, and a guy who builds delicate keyboard instruments, teaming up to build a decapitation device.
It's wild.
That sounds like the world's most macabre DIY weekend project.
It really does. But, they weren't starting entirely from scratch, to be fair. The concept of a gravity-powered blade had been floating around the cultural consciousness for centuries.
Yeah, they looked at earlier beheading machines used across Europe.
Right, like the Halifax gibbet in 16th century England, which used a massive sliding axe head.
And there was the Scottish maiden and the Italian mannaia.
There's even a text from the year 1210, the High History of the Holy Grail, that features an imaginary automated beheading device.
But the French committee refined it into the terrifyingly efficient machine we know today. And the most famous refinement came from a very unexpected source.
King Louis VI himself.
Right. The king was apparently an amateur locksmith and had a keen interest in mechanics.
He did. And the official executioner at the time, Charles-Henri Sanson, claimed in his memoirs that the king looked at the early designs, which used a crescent-shaped blade, and pointed out a major mechanical flaw.
What's fascinating here is the physics of that design choice, paired with the sheer inescapable irony of the moment.
It's unbelievable.
The crescent blade relies entirely on blunt chopping force. It hits the cervical vertebrae and can easily get wedged in the bone, stalling the mechanism.
Yeah, which defeats the purpose of a clean cut.
Exactly. So the king suggested an oblique, sharply angled blade instead. An angled blade acts much like a modern chef's knife or a paper cutter.
It uses a slicing, drawing motion that cleanly severs tissue and bone with significantly less friction.
And he was offering this casual engineering tip to optimize the exact machine that, just a few years later, would be used to sever his own head.
I mean, you can't write that.
You really can't. He was the ultimate symbol of the ancient regime, that old, rigid system of absolute royalty and feudal privilege, and he quite literally helped sharpen the instrument of his own demise.
It is a dark, almost unbelievable twist of fate. So they perfect the machine based on his advice. They test it on sheep and calves, then on human corpses.
Right.
And on April 25th, 1792, it is officially debuted on a highwayman named Nicolas Jacques Pelletier.
And it works exactly as intended. It is swift, it is clean, and compared to the breaking wheel, it's an absolute medical mercy.
It really was.
But this is where the story takes a massive turn, because this tool of Enlightenment compassion is almost immediately co-opted.
Yeah, the revolution radicalizes. We enter the period known as the Reign of Terror, from roughly late 1793 to mid-1794.
And the guillotine transforms overnight from an instrument of penal reform into the ultimate weapon of political purging.
The sheer scale of it is staggering. During the Reign of Terror, roughly 17,000 people were guillotined.
So 17,000, that's just...
It's hard to fathom. This included King Louis VI, Marie Antoinette, and eventually the revolutionary leaders themselves.
Men like Georges Danton and Maximilien Robespierre.
Right, men who had enthusiastically sent thousands to the blade before meeting it themselves.
And it wasn't just a grim bureaucratic process either. It became a massive public spectacle.
Oh, it became a macabre festival.
Yeah.
Executions were held in major public squares, like the Place de la Révolution. Enormous crowds would gather daily.
Yeah.
Imagine you're walking through a public square in Paris, and vendors are weaving through the crowd selling printed programs that list the names of the days condemned.
Exactly like you'd buy a program at a baseball game today.
It's chilling.
The machine became a perverse kind of celebrity. The public gave it all these dark, affectionate nicknames.
Oh, the nicknames are wild.
They called it the Widow, the National Razor, the Silence Mill. They called it Cap Hates Necktie, Cappy being the king's family name.
Right.
And my personal favorite, the Patriotic Shortener.
The patriotic shortener, wow.
The working class radicals, the sans-culottes, they didn't view it as an instrument of oppression. They viewed it as a positive, tangible tool for revolutionary progress.
They really did.
So what does this all mean? How does a society emotionally process and actually celebrate that level of normalized daily violence?
Well, it means we have to understand the guillotine not just as a weapon, but as a theater of justice.
A theater of justice.
Yeah. For the revolutionaries, the machine physically demonstrated the destruction of the old world. Remember that under the ancient regime, privilege dictated how you lived and how you died.
Right. The nobles got the sword, commoners got the wheel.
Exactly. The guillotine leveled the playing field in the most violent, visible way possible. When the crowd cheered the fall of the blade, they weren't just cheering death, they were cheering the visual, undeniable proof that the aristocracy bled exactly the same way the peasantry did.
Wow.
Equality in death equated to equality before the law.
That is a chilling way to frame it. Equality achieved through an industrial blade.
Yeah.
And, we tend to think of the guillotine as firmly locked in that 18th century context, surrounded by men in powdered wigs and knee breeches.
But it wasn't.
No, the guillotine didn't stop in France. If we trace its lineage through the 20th century, we see it morph from this public spectacle of revolution into a hidden, bureaucratized tool of modern state extermination.
The timeline of its use in the 20th century challenges our entire narrative of modern progress.
It really does.
As states evolved, they didn't necessarily abandon the guillotine, they just adapted it to solve different logistical problems.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at how different governments handled it.
Okay.
France kept executing people publicly with the guillotine all the way until 1939.
1939, right before World War II.
Exactly. The last public execution was a convicted murderer named Eugen Weidmann. But the only reason France stopped doing it in public wasn't because the state suddenly found it inhumane.
No, not at all.
It was because the crowd's behavior was so unruly and, quote, hysterical, according to the records, that the French president was disgusted and ordered all future executions moved behind closed prison doors.
So just wanted to hide it.
Right. France tried to hide it out of shame, but they didn't officially abolish the death penalty and the guillotine until 1981.
1981.
The last person to die by guillotine in France was Hamida Jandoubi in September 1977.
1977. I mean, that is well within living memory for millions of people today.
It's crazy.
And while France was pushing the machine behind closed doors out of embarrassment, other regimes were actively scaling it up for efficiency.
In Germany, the guillotine was known as the Fallbeil, or falling axe.
Right.
Over time, they engineered it to be sturdier. They built them primarily out of metal instead of wood, with heavier blades and shorter uprights to reduce the mechanical reset time.
Which is terrifying.
They even added a metal screen to hide the blade from the condemned person's view and removed the tilting board so they could process executions faster.
They took an Enlightenment tool of mercy and turned it into an assembly line.
Yeah. Between 1933 and 1945, Nazi Germany used these modernized heavy metal guillotines to execute approximately 16,500 prisoners.
16,500.
And 10,000 of them were in 1944 and 1945 alone. This included famous political dissidents and resistance fighters, like the Dutch communist Marinus van der Lubbe.
Right.
And think about the chilling contrast here. Sophie Scholl, a 21-year-old university student who distributed anti-Nazi pamphlets with the White Rose Resistance Group.
Yeah, an incredible figure.
She was executed using the exact same mechanical efficiency designed by a French doctor 150 years prior.
It's heartbreaking. And the bureaucratization of death continued behind the Iron Curtain after the war, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Stasi in East Germany utilized the guillotine for secret executions well into the 1960s, finally ceasing its use in 1966.
1966, and it even appeared in Southeast Asia.
Right, right.
In 1959, the regime in South Vietnam enacted a decree that dispatched mobile special military courts into the countryside.
They made it mobile?
They literally strapped guillotines left over from the French colonial era onto trucks and brought them right into the rural areas to intimidate the population and carry out death sentences on the spot.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the guillotine functioned almost like an open-source technology of death.
Open source.
Yeah, it was terrifyingly easy to export, adapt, and scale. From mobile terror units in Vietnam to the industrial-scale execution chambers in Nazi Germany, Dr. Guillotine's simple mechanism proved to be infinitely adaptable to the needs of any state apparatus looking to dispense with human life efficiently.
Which brings us to a bizarre moment in modern American history, because this device almost made a comeback in the United States in the late 1990s.
I still can't believe this part.
In 1996, a Georgia state representative named Doug Tepper officially sponsored a bill to replace the state's electric chair with the guillotine.
It sounds totally absurd to modern ears, but from a purely mechanical standpoint, Tepper was actually echoing Dr. Guillotine's original argument.
Right.
A clean blade is undeniably more reliable and likely faster than electrocution, which has a horrific history of being botched and causing immense suffering.
Okay, but if the guillotine was universally recognized as more humane and mechanically efficient than the electric chair, why did Doug Tepper's 1996 proposal fail so spectacularly? Is it just because the psychological baggage of the guillotine,
Yeah.
the severed head, the blood, the legacy of the Reign of Terror, is just too heavy and too visual for modern society to stomach?
It's entirely about visibility and psychological distance. Modern society has a profound squeamishness when it comes to the physical reality of violence.
Yeah, we really do.
We prefer our capital punishment to look like a peaceful medical procedure, like lethal injection, where the person just appears to fall asleep.
Right. It looks clinical.
Exactly. The guillotine is undeniably brutally honest about what is happening. It violently severs the body. It produces a tremendous amount of blood.
It's messy.
Very messy. It forces society to look directly at the reality of state-sanctioned death, and we generally refuse to look at that.
This modern squeamishness brings us right back to Dr. Guillotine's original Enlightenment promise, the promise of a painless death.
Right, was it actually painless?
Because the great, gruesome debate that has haunted this machine since 1792 is the question of the living head.
This is where it gets really dark.
Because the blade falls so fast and the cut is so clean, does the brain actually survive decapitation, at least for a few agonizing moments?
It is the ultimate nightmare scenario. You design a machine specifically to prevent suffering, but by doing so, you might have created a completely new, unimaginable type of psychological and physical horror.
The source material shares an absolutely chilling account from a French physician named Dr. Gabriel Beaulieu in 1905.
Oh, this account is famous.
He was permitted to closely observe the severed head of an executed prisoner named Henri Languille immediately after the blade fell into the basket.
Yeah.
Beaulieu wrote that for the first 5 or 6 seconds, the eyelids and lips worked in rhythmic contractions.
Which you might expect.
Right. So he waited for the spasms to stop. And then he called out the prisoner's name in a sharp voice. He said, "Languille."
The response he records defies our basic comfort about death.
Beaulieu writes that Languille's eyelids slowly lifted up.
Without any spasms, right?
Without any spasms, in a totally normal movement, like someone waking up.
Wow.
He says Languille's eyes, quote, very definitely fixed themselves on mine, and the pupils focused themselves.
Think about how terrifying that is. You're looking into the eyes of a severed head, and it looks back.
It looks back. Bury insists he was dealing with undeniably living eyes which were looking at him.
And it happened more than once.
Right. The eyelids closed. Bury called his name a second time. The eyes opened again, focused with even more penetration before closing.
Incredible.
Only on the third call did the eyes remain still and take on the glazed look of the dead.
It is a profound medical horror story, and it taps into a very real biological mechanism.
How so?
Well, when the head is cleanly severed, the brain is instantly deprived of new oxygen and blood pressure drops to 0.
Right.
But the residual oxygen in the brain tissues isn't instantly depleted. It takes a few moments.
Wait, I have to play skeptic here. Is this actual conscious awareness? Or is the doctor just witnessing involuntary biological spasms like a massive misfiring of severed nerves as the system shuts down, and he's projecting a look of recognition onto them because, deep down, he expects or fears a response?
This raises an important question, and it is the exact question that scientists and historians still fiercely debate today.
So we don't know?
There is no absolute scientific consensus on what Henri Langlois experienced in those seconds. It might be entirely reflex, the nervous system firing wildly in the absence of a body, or, terrifyingly, it might be fleeting consciousness as the brain rapidly loses oxygen.
That is just deeply unsettling.
That ambiguity is exactly what shatters our comforting illusions. We want to believe we can perfectly engineer a painless death, but the biology of the human body is messy, resilient, and deeply mysterious.
It leaves us completely in the dark.
It really does.
So to quickly recap the incredible journey of this deep dive, we started in the bloody, unequal public squares of 18th century France with the breaking wheel.
Where things were as bad as they could get.
Right. We met an Enlightenment physician who genuinely just wanted to end human suffering by standardizing death.
A well-intentioned idea.
We traveled through the gruesome, theatrical spectacle of the Reign of Terror, where his machine of mercy became a celebrity of slaughter.
The patriotic shortener.
Exactly. We witnessed the horrifying bureaucratization of the device by 20th century regimes, from Nazi Germany to Vietnam.
And even its near revival in 1990s Georgia.
Right. And we ended with a haunting medical mystery about human consciousness staring back at us from a basket.
It's a staggering trajectory for a device that is, mechanically speaking, so incredibly simple.
It really is. So we'll leave you with this final thought to mull over. If a machine designed purely out of a desire for human compassion and equality can so easily be co-opted into an instrument of mass terror, what does that say about the powerful technologies we are building today with purely good intentions?
It's a heavy question.
Think back to Dr. Guillotine, standing before the assembly, believing he was offering a gift of mercy. Sometimes the road to the reign of terror is paved with the best of intentions. Imagine, if you will, just a really specific scenario. You are stuck in a rural house, miles from literally anywhere interesting.
Oh, the ultimate claustrophobic nightmare.
Right. And the weather outside is just aggressively awful. The people around you are constantly complaining about how profoundly bored they are.
And I'm guessing nobody actually likes each other either.
Exactly. Everyone in the room is secretly nursing this massive, life-defining grudge against someone else sitting right at the table.
So basically a recipe for a truly agonizing family vacation.
Yeah, pretty much. You're tracked with your own spiraling thoughts and just the incredibly annoying habits of the people closest to you. You're waiting for the pressure cooker to explode.
Hoping for some massive argument to finally clear the air so you can all just go home, right?
But the truly terrifying part is when that massive argument finally happens and absolutely nothing changes.
Which is devastating.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that deeply uncomfortable, suffocating setup forms the basis of one of the most famous, continually adapted pieces of literature in the world. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
I am very excited for this one.
Today, we are immersing ourselves in Anton Chekhov's 1897 masterpiece, Uncle Vanya. We're pulling from a comprehensive Wikipedia article detailing the play's history, its psychological mechanics, and its massive cultural impact.
Because it is widely considered a play that fundamentally rewired modern theater.
Right.
Yet if you just look at a bulleted list of the events, it seems to be about absolutely nothing happening.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to figure out how a play focused on dashed hopes, unrequited love, and what the text literally calls the ennui of provincial existence manages to remain so incredibly relevant.
It's a great question.
Like, how does a story about bored, unhappy people in 19th century Russia continue to captivate audiences who, know these themes inside and out, driving endless revivals from Broadway to the silver screen?
Well, to understand the engine of this play, we really have to look at the blueprint. And that blueprint is entirely about subtraction.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Because the play didn't start out as the quiet, devastating piece we know today.
Right, so to understand why Uncle Vanya works so flawlessly, we first have to examine the drastic, almost surgical changes Chekhov made to the story.
It really is unique among his major works.
Yeah, because it's essentially a massive, ruthless rewrite of a play he published a decade earlier called The Wood Demon.
The revision process is basically a masterclass in dramaturgical evolution. Critics like Donald Rayfield and Eric Bentley have used the stark differences between the two texts to map out exactly how Chekhov invented his specific brand of theatrical realism.
And there's a fascinating context to this, right?
There is. Rayfield points out something crucial here. Scholarship suggests Chekhov heavily revised this text around the time of his 1891 trip to the island of Sakhalin.
And just for context, Sakhalin was a brutal penal colony in eastern Russia.
Exactly. And Chekhov was a doctor, and he went there to observe and document the horrific conditions of the prisoners.
That context changes everything, doesn't it? He goes to a literal prison colony, witnesses the absolute extremes of human endurance and chronic suffering, and then comes back to rewrite his play.
Yeah, he takes the wood demon and just starts hacking away at the excess. He slashes the cast list from almost 24 characters down to just 9 essential figures.
Stripping it down to the studs.
Right. But more importantly, he completely strips out the melodrama. I mean, in the original play, there is a climactic suicide.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and in Uncle Vanya, he changes that into a failed homicide. And he takes the original happy ending and completely deletes it, swapping it for a much more ambiguous, terrifyingly open-ended resolution.
So he essentially looked at standard 19th century theater, which, relied heavily on neat resolutions, mustache-twirling villains, fainting maidens, grand tragic deaths, and decided it was a lie.
Because real life doesn't usually offer a clean, dramatic exit.
Wait, hold on. I see the intellectual value in that, but from a purely theatrical perspective, if you take away the dramatic suicide, the big villain, and the happy ending, aren't you just left with a really boring play?
That's what you might think, but...
Like, you're taking away the emotional payoffs that an audience buys a ticket to see. It's like taking a standard Hollywood action movie, stripping away all the explosions, the car chases, and the hero getting the girl, and just filming the awkward, tense car rides between the action scenes. Where's the hook?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the hook is actually in the psychological realism. By removing those grand theatrical releases, Chekhov actually turns up the tension exponentially.
How so?
A dramatic suicide is tragic, yes, but in the context of a story, it is an escape. It ends the suffering. By removing the finality of death and the comfort of a happy ending, Chekhov forces his characters to do something much, much harder.
He forces them to just keep going.
Exactly. He forces them to wake up the next morning, face the person they despise or the person who will never love them back, and do their chores anyway. It is the tragedy of the mundane.
And for the audience, that is infinitely more terrifying, because it's infinitely more relatable.
Oh, 100%.
It's the realization that you aren't going to get a dramatic exit. You just have to keep living your unfulfilled life. And that focus on the mundane brings us directly into the ecosystem of this rural estate.
Right, because instead of looking at this like a traditional cast of characters, we really need to look at it as a closed ecosystem.
Right, so you have Vanya, who is 47, and his niece, Sonia. For years, they have been the worker bees. They've tirelessly managed this rural estate, squeezing every penny out of it.
That they aren't doing it to build their own wealth.
No. They're sending all the profits to the city to fund the glamorous intellectual life of Sonia's father, Professor Sproyakov.
And Sorovyakov is essentially a parasite on this ecosystem. He's a retired university professor who has lived off the sweat of Vanya and Sonia, maintaining this illusion of intellectual greatness while contributing absolutely nothing to the actual survival of the estate.
But the ecosystem is completely upended when the professor retires and moves back to the estate, and he brings his beautiful 27-year-old second wife, Yelena.
And if the professor is the parasite, Yelena is the catalyst.
Yeah, and she doesn't actually do anything malicious. She just exists.
Right. They sleep in late, they demand tea at weird hours, and they completely shatter the working rhythm of the farm.
And in that disruption, Vanya suddenly realizes that the man he has worshipped and slaved away for is a total fraud. He realizes the professor isn't a great mind at all. Behind his back, Vanya brutally calls him a learned old dried mackerel.
Which is such a great insult. But think about a time in your own life when you realized a mentor, a boss, or a hero of yours was actually incredibly flawed or totally incompetent. It's a jarring feeling.
Definitely.
Now imagine you had sacrificed your youth, your finances, and your own ambitions to serve that person. That is where Vanya is operating from. The insult is funny, but it is fueled by a terrifying, profound grief over his own misspent life.
And Yelena's presence acts like a mirror that forces everyone to look at their own misery. Both Vanya and the local Dr. Astrov become completely obsessed with her.
And meanwhile, you have Sonya, who is plain and practical, desperately and unrequitedly in love with Dr. Astrov.
Now, Astrov is a really fascinating character to me, because when he isn't pining for Yelena or complaining about his exhausting medical practice, he is obsessively passionate about the destruction of Russian forests.
Oh, yeah.
The source material points out that Astrov's rants make this play one of the earliest discussions of ecological problems in world literature.
It is a stunning element to find in an 1890s text. I mean, Astrov gives these incredibly detailed, passionate speeches about the climate, the flora, and the fauna.
He's out there planting trees.
Exactly, trying to preserve the landscape while the rest of Russia is chopping down forests to fuel industrialization.
Which begs the question, why put an eco-warrior in the middle of a play about depressed Russian aristocrats? It feels almost like Chekhov is mashing two different plays together. Is Astrov just a mouthpiece for Chekhov's own politics?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, not at all. The environmentalism is deeply tied to the psychology of the play.
How so?
Well, Astrov sees the Russian forests being decimated, and he views this degradation of the landscape as a direct mirror to the degradation of the human spirit.
Oh, wow.
He tells the other characters that they are destroying the beauty of the world just out of sheer laziness and a lack of vision. Astrov's desperate need to plant trees is his way of trying to leave a legacy because he feels his own human potential is completely dead.
He's trying to cultivate life in the soil because he can't cultivate it in himself. That makes so much sense. It really elevates the whole dynamic.
Right.
Because on the surface, you have Sonya loving Astrov, Astrov and Vanya loving Yelena, and Yelena trapped with a miserable professor. It would be very easy to dismiss this as just a 19th century soap opera wrapped in a fancy Russian coat.
And that is a trap many poor productions fall into. But Chekhov is doing something far more surgical.
Okay.
The romantic entanglements are symptoms, not the disease. These characters aren't actually experiencing epic romance. Vanya and Astrov chasing Yelena are essentially distractions.
To avoid looking at themselves.
Yeah, precisely. They are throwing themselves into these dramatic, hopeless infatuations so they don't have to face the terrifying emptiness of their own choices.
Because Yelena confesses she married the professor because she thought she loved his intellect, but it was an illusion.
And Astrov admits he is completely numb to life. They are all using the drama of unrequited love as a shield against the existential dread of their own mediocrity.
Right. And that simmering resentment over wasted youth, over feeling totally unappreciated, and over realizing your life is half over with nothing to show for it, that pressure cooker finally blows in Act 3.
It does.
And it leads to a climax that is arguably one of the most pathetic and yet brilliant moments in theater history.
It is the ultimate anticlimax, engineered to perfection.
Yeah. And the inciting incident is completely selfish. The professor gathers the entire family to announce a brilliant new business plan. He wants to sell the rural estate.
Which is wild.
Right. Because legally, the estate belongs to his daughter Sonya, and it is the only home Vanya has ever known. But the professor wants to sell it out from under them, invest the money to get a higher yield, and hopefully buy a nice little villa in Finland for himself and Yelena.
He's essentially announcing that he is going to make Vanya and Sonya homeless so he can live a more comfortable retirement.
And the darkest part is that the professor expects them to just agree to it.
Because they always have. He assumes their subservience is absolute.
But Vanya snaps. Decades of submission just evaporate in an instant. He starts raging. He screams about his sacrifices. He literally yells that without the professor holding him back all these years, he could have been a genius.
Right. He claims he could have been a second Schopenhauer or a Dostoevsky.
Yes. And he storms out of the room. The professor, highly offended, goes after him to demand respect, and then, offstage, we hear a gunshot.
Now, the audience is conditioned to expect the tragedy here, the murder.
Exactly. Here's where it gets really interesting. The professor comes running back onto the stage, absolutely terrified, chased by Vanya, who has a pistol. Vanya points the gun point blank at his tormentor. He fires again. And he misses.
2 shots, entirely missed.
Completely missed. Disgusted with himself, Vanya throws the gun down and just gives up.
So pathetic.
And later on, in Act 4, Vanya tries to steal a vial of Astrov's morphine to commit suicide. But Sonya and Astrov eventually corner him, they plead with him, and he just voluntarily hands the morphine back.
He surrenders the last possible escape route.
Yeah, and here's what I find so fascinating about this. The psychology of missing that shot. It's not just that he has bad aim. It's like a dog that has been tied to a post in the yard its entire life.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Even when the leash finally snaps, the dog doesn't know how to run away. It just stands in the yard and barks. Vanya's subservience is so deeply ingrained into his very DNA that his body literally will not let him pull off the murder. But I have to wonder, looking at his meltdown, was Vanya actually a genius? Was he really robbed of his potential to be the next Dostoevsky? Or is the professor just a highly convenient excuse for Vanya's own lack of talent?
That question cuts to the absolute core of Vanya's tragedy, and the brutal truth is, it doesn't matter.
Really?
It doesn't matter if he was a genius or totally unremarkable. The tragedy is that Vanya voluntarily handed over his agency to another human being without ever questioning it.
Right.
He chose to dedicate his life to a man he didn't really investigate, and he waited until he was 47 years old to ask why. His profound self-disgust when he throws that gun down is the realization of his own utter impotence. He realizes he can't even play the role of the villain correctly.
He is incapable of even ruining his own life with dignity. And that realization paves the way for the most devastating resolution possible. The professor and Yelena realize they can't stay. They pack their bag.
The disruption is over.
Yeah, and before they leave, Serebryakov and Vanya actually make peace. They mutually agree that all will be as it was before. The outsiders leave. And Vanya and Sonia simply walk back over to their desks, sit down, and start doing the estate's ledger accounts again. Vanya's mother goes back to reading her pamphlets.
That is Chekhov's genius right there. The true tragedy isn't death, it is the inescapable return to the status quo.
It's the quiet devastation of just going back to your chores while your soul is bleeding, and it is exactly that blank canvas of silent, enduring misery that has made this text endlessly adaptable for over a century.
Absolutely.
Act 4 famously ends with Sonia giving this heartbreaking speech to Vanya. He's weeping, talking about how heavy his heart is. And Sonia, who has also just lost any chance she had at love, tells him that they simply have to keep working. She promises him that eventually, after a long life of labor, in the afterlife, we shall rest.
We shall rest. It's a chilling mantra. It is the ultimate coping mechanism for survival when all of your illusions have been permanently stripped away.
And the survival of this play is a story in itself. It didn't launch with some massive glitzy premiere. The very first public performance in 1897 happened in a provincial city called Rostov-on-Don.
Right, staged by a fan.
Yes, a fan named Nikolai Sinelnikov. He literally just bought a copy of the Polish script, got a troupe together, and put it on. Chekhov didn't even know it was happening until the audience demanded a telegram be sent to him praising the work.
That's incredible.
It wasn't until 1899 that it had its official premiere at the Moscow Art Theater, directed by Konstantin Stanislavski, who fundamentally understood the deep psychological undercurrents Chekhov was playing with.
And Stanislavski's production proved to the world that you didn't need melodrama to captivate an audience, you just needed emotional truth. And once that door was opened, it never closed.
The cultural footprint listed in our sources is staggering. It crosses every language and medium. You have Laurence Olivier's 1962 stage production, which British critics called the master achievement in 20th century theater.
A classic.
And you have films that transplant the exact psychological dynamics into totally different cultures. There is Country Life from 1994, which sets the entire story in the harsh, isolated environment of the Australian outback.
And the outback setting works brilliantly because the physical isolation mirrors the psychological isolation of the characters. And more recently, you have the acclaimed 2021 Japanese film, Drive My Car.
Yes, Drive My Car uses a multilingual theater production of Uncle Vanya as its central framing device. The characters in the film are grappling with their own profound grief, and as they rehearse Chekhov's lines, the play acts as a conduit for their unspoken trauma.
It proves that the alienation Chekhov wrote about transcends spoken language entirely.
It's incredibly elastic. You can stretch this text almost any direction.
Whoa.
We see that elasticity constantly on the modern stage. Like in 2024, Steve Carell, an actor famous for comedy, made his Broadway debut playing Uncle Vanya, starring alongside William Jackson Harper, who earned a Tony nomination as Astrov.
Such a wild casting choice, but it works.
And in 2023, Andrew Scott won a Laurence Olivier Award for doing the entire play as a one-man show in London. And then you have the parodies.
Oh, the parodies are great.
There's a post-apocalyptic stage adaptation titled Uncle Vanya and Zombies. And the reduced Shakespeare Company famously condensed the entire emotional arc of the play into just 3 lines. "Are you Uncle Vanya? I am. Sound of a gunshot. Ouch."
Which is funny, but also perfectly captures the absolute futility of Vanya's rebellion.
So what does this all mean? building on that elasticity.
Yeah.
How is this possible? How can a text with such a heavy, suffocating premise, where the climax is a missed gunshot and the ending is doing accounting, how can it be played by Steve Carell, performed as a one-man show, relocated to the outback, or surrounded by literal zombies? What is the core engine that makes all of those wildly different interpretations work?
This raises an important question, and it really comes down to a concept Astroff mentions in Act 4. He tells Vanya that years of living what he calls the narrow-minded life have made them vulgar.
The narrow-minded life.
Yes. That fear of the narrow-minded life is the universal engine. It is the terrifying suspicion that your daily routine, your commute, your chores, your polite conversations is slowly, invisibly eroding your potential.
Wow.
It's the fear that you are shrinking to fit a life that is too small for you.
It is the ultimate fear of missing out. But you aren't missing out on a party or a vacation. You are missing out on your own life. You're watching it happen from the passenger seat.
Precisely. Everyone across every culture and time period understands that specific, quiet terror. We all understand the feeling of looking at a spreadsheet or washing the dishes and suddenly wondering, is this it? Is this the sum total of what I am meant to do?
Yeah.
And equally universal is the strained, almost absurd resilience required to just keep going anyway, to sit back down at the desk and do the math, even when your heart is completely broken. That is why you can put these characters in a one-man show where the isolation is literal, or in a zombie apocalypse, which is just the ultimate metaphor for a mindless, consuming status quo. The core human struggle remains perfectly intact.
It is the tragedy and the comedy of everyday existence. We started this deep dive wondering how a play stripped of traditional action, lacking a heroic climax, and ending without a neat, happy bow could survive and thrive for over a century.
And we found our answer.
Right. Chekhov realized theatrical explosions are cheap. He replaced them with the quiet, terrifying implosions of normal people. He held up a mirror to our own disappointments, our ridiculous attempts to blame other people for our own choices, and our quiet, stubborn endurance.
He proves that surviving the mundane day in and day out is its own kind of epic struggle.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over today. We spent a lot of time talking about Sonia's heartbreaking promise at the end of the play. Her promise to Vanya that if they just keep their heads down and keep working, eventually in the afterlife, we shall rest.
It's so heavy.
Vanya's ultimate tragedy was that he waited until he was 47 years old, a gun trembling in his hand, to realize he had been living his entire life for someone else's benefit. He sacrificed his youth to manage an estate for a man who viewed him as nothing more than a convenient leisure keeper.
It really is the ultimate cautionary tale about giving away your agency.
So I invite you to look at your own life right now. Look at the routines you've built and the obligations you've accepted. Are you tirelessly managing someone else's estate? Whether that estate is a boss's dream you don't really believe in, a family expectation that you never actually agreed to, or a societal pressure you feel forced to maintain. Are you grinding away, shrinking yourself down, waiting for a payoff or a rest that might never actually arrive?
It's a lot to think about.
It's a heavy question to sit with. But as Chekhov so brilliantly shows us, it is far better to ask that question of yourself today, rather than waiting for the moment you finally snap. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling, well, a huge sweep of history, almost 8 centuries of civilization. Al-Andalus.
It really is fascinating. One of the most intellectually vibrant and, let's face it, politically complex places in the entire Middle Ages.
So Al-Andalus, that's the Muslim-ruled part of the Iberian Peninsula, right? From about 711 all the way up to 1492.
Exactly. And as our sources really stress, it acted as this crucial kind of transformative bridge between the Islamic East and the Latin West. Hugely important.
Okay, so our mission today, for you listening, is pretty straightforward. We want to give you a focused way into understanding this period. We'll try to unpack the politics, which were definitely volatile,
Well, that's
the
true.
incredible scientific output, and that really complex social fabric, all packed into this long-lived civilization.
And just to frame it geographically and politically, it wasn't static, of course. It started as a province, part of the Umayyad Caliphate way out in Damascus.
Right.
But then it becomes the independent emirate of Cordoba, then the Caliphate. And eventually, after a lot of fragmentation, it shrinks down to just that final small emirate of Granada. It occupied most of the peninsula at its height, though.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning then, 711 AD. How did Muslim rule actually take root so fast in Iberia?
Well, it kicks off with the initial invasion led by Tariq ibn Ziyad. Gibraltar. That name actually comes from him. Jabal Iriq, Tariq's mountain.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that.
Yeah, and his forces, they were mainly Berbers, North Africans initially. They won this really decisive victory against the Visigothic King Roderick, the Battle of Guadalete.
And that just opened the floodgates.
Pretty much. It allowed for this rapid expansion across most of the peninsula over the next, well, maybe 7 years or so. Very quick.
But the unity, that link back to the Umayyad Caliphate in Damascus, that didn't last too long, did it? Especially after the Abbasids took over in at least around 750.
No, not at all. That political upheaval in the East, the Abbasid Revolution, it basically triggered one of history's great escape stories right there in Al-Andalus.
You mean Abu al-Rahman III?
Absolutely. The immigrant, they called him. He was basically the only high-ranking Umayyad prince to escape the Abbasid purges. It's an incredible story. He fled, hid out in North Africa for like 4 years, then makes his way across to Spain and manages to rally support and declare himself the independent emir of Cordoba in 756. Just amazing determination.
And he wasn't just, hiding out. He was immediately a major power player. I love that anecdote, the one from the sources about the Abbasid Caliph Al-Mansur.
Yeah, that's a classic.
After Abd al-Rahman defeated this huge Abbasid invasion force sent against him, he apparently sent the head of the Abbasid governor back to Baghdad, preserved.
He did. A pretty clear message.
And Al-Mansur supposedly said, "Praise be to God who has put the sea between me and this devil." I mean, that really tells you something about the power Al-Andalus had right from the start.
It really does. And that independence, that political break, it really set the stage for the civilization's peak. Fast forward a bit. Under Abd al-Rahman III, the emirate felt strong enough to declare itself a full caliphate in 929. That kicks off the Golden Age.
And we're not just talking about local bragging rights here. Cordoba, the capital.
Yeah.
It became arguably the leading city in the world at that point.
There's a strong case to be made, yeah. Sources suggest it might have actually overtaken Constantinople in population, in wealth, in just sheer vibrancy. It was a massive center for trade, art, scholarship. Truly dazzling.
But that kind of success often breeds its own problems, doesn't it? Internal conflict.
Almost inevitably. A really devastating civil war broke out between 1009 and 1013. It just shattered the caliphate's unity. And this leads to what's called the Taifa period.
Ah, the fragmented kingdoms.
Exactly. Lots of little mini-states, usually based around a major city, run by different dynasties. They're often culturally brilliant, patrons of arts and science, but politically and militarily, very weak.
Right. So if these taifas are weak, and meanwhile the Christian kingdoms up in the north are getting stronger, especially after Castile captures the major city of Toledo in 1085.
A huge turning point, Toledo.
They must have felt incredibly vulnerable. So the usual move then is to call in outside help, right? Mercenaries, allies.
That's exactly what they did. The Taifa rulers, feeling the pressure, made this fateful decision to ask the Almoravids, this powerful Berber empire based in North Africa, for help against the Christians.
And the Almoravids came.
They came, they pushed back the Christian advances, yes. But then they looked around at these squabbling Taifa states and basically decided they were unfit to rule and too weak to defend Al-Andalus.
Ah, so they just took over.
Pretty much. They went from allies to conquerors, unifying Al-Andalus under their own rule, governed from Marrakesh.
So the hired help became the new masters, and then didn't that cycle basically repeat itself later?
It did. The Almoravids eventually weakened and were replaced by another, even more zealous North African Berber dynasty, the Almohads. So the key point here is that for about a century and a half, maybe a bit more, Al-Andalus was largely ruled by these successive Berber empires from across the straits.
And they're generally more austere, more fundamentalist.
Increasingly so, especially the Almohads. This constant political instability, this reliance on external powers, it's really central to understanding the whole story of Al-Andalus.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit then. From the politics, which were clearly messy, to the intellectual side. Because this place became a real powerhouse for knowledge, didn't it? How did Al-Andalus become such a key conduit for transferring knowledge into medieval Europe?
It essentially acted as a giant intellectual clearinghouse. You had scholars coming from all over the Islamic world, even from parts of Europe, to study in places like Cordoba. They had access to this huge repository of texts, Greek classics, Persian works, Indian science, all preserved and expanded upon in Arabic.
And the translation efforts were massive.
Huge. And what's really interesting is that even after the Christians reconquered major centers, like Toledo in 1085, they recognized the value of this knowledge. They set up institutions, the famous Toledo School of Translators being the prime example, specifically to translate these crucial Arabic texts into Latin.
So the knowledge transfer continued even as the political map was changing.
Absolutely. And that had a profound, direct impact on sparking intellectual life in Christian Europe, eventually feeding into the Renaissance.
Let's talk specifics. Medicine, for instance. We hear about figures like Abu al-Qasim al-Zarawi, Al-Bukhasis in Latin, often called the father of surgery.
Yes, al-Zarawi. His major work, The Arrangement of Medical Knowledge, finished around 1000 CE, was groundbreaking. It wasn't just theory. It included detailed illustrations of over 200 surgical instruments, many he designed himself.
Wow.
And crucially, he included his personal experiences, his own case studies from surgeries he'd performed. That blend of received knowledge and practical application made it an essential surgical text in Europe for literally centuries.
And it wasn't just him. The sources mention families like the Ibn Zurs, producing like 5 generations of doctors.
That's right. It shows a real depth and institutionalization of medical learning. It wasn't just one brilliant individual.
Okay, beyond medicine, what about things like astronomy? Were they just preserving Greek ideas or pushing things forward?
Definitely pushing forward. Andalusi astronomers were real critical thinkers. They didn't just accept the old Greek models blindly. Figures like Averroes Ibn Rushd actively questioned the complex Ptolemaic system of cycles and epicycles. They argued for models that were more physically coherent, based on Aristotle's ideas of concentric spheres.
And there were some incredibly precise calculations being made too, weren't there?
Astonishingly precise. You have Abu Ishaq Ibrahim al-Zarqali, known as a Zarquil in Latin. He calculated the motion of the solar apogee, that's the slow shift in the point of the Earth's orbit furthest from the sun, with incredible accuracy. His figure was 12.04 seconds of arc per year.
That sounds very precise for the 11th century.
It's remarkably close to the modern value. It shows an extraordinary level of observational skill and mathematical sophistication. And it explains why, 500 years later, Copernicus actually cites al-Zarqali by name in his own revolutionary work.
So a direct line of influence there.
Undeniable.
This knowledge transfer wasn't just theoretical, though. Al-Andalus also saw a massive agricultural revolution, didn't it? Something that physically changed the land.
Oh, absolutely. Agronomy, the science of farming, just flourished. This was often state-supported, with large-scale irrigation projects. They introduced and perfected techniques like the acequia, these underground water channels that minimized evaporation.
Clever. Making the most of the water they had.
Exactly. It dramatically expanded the amount of land that could be farmed productively.
Yeah, and this changed what people ate, too. What sort of new crops came in through those Islamic trade networks?
A whole host of things that are staples now. Sugarcane, rice, cotton, hard wheat for pasta, citrus fruits like oranges and lemons.
Things we associate with Spain today.
Many of them, yes. The pomegranate is another great example. It thrived so well, it actually became the symbol of Granada itself. And you can still see the legacy today. Think of the Palmaroll of Elche, that huge palm grove near Alicante. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a direct relic of this North African agricultural technology transfer.
Amazing. Okay, we need to move on to the cultural side, the society itself. Because this clearly wasn't a single, uniform culture. It was multi-religious, multi-ethnic.
Very much so. You had the ruling Muslims, who were themselves initially divided. You had the Arab elite, who arrived early on, and then the Berbers, who came in waves, both initially and later with the Almoravids and Almohads. There were tensions there sometimes.
But the majority of Muslims weren't Arabs or Berbers eventually.
That's a crucial point from the sources. By around the year 1100, perhaps 80% of the Muslim population were Muladis. These were native Iberians whose families had converted to Islam over the preceding century.
80%. Wow.
Yeah.
That implies a huge amount of local conversion.
It does. It suggests that Islam became deeply rooted in the peninsula itself, not just something imposed by conquerors. Then, of course, you had significant Christian communities. They were known as Mazaribs.
They kept their religion but adopted Arab culture.
Largely, yes. They spoke Arabic, adopted many customs, lived within the Muslim-ruled states, but maintained their Christian faith and ecclesiastical structure, though often under restrictions. And then Very importantly, you had the Jewish communities.
And their experience varied quite a lot over time.
Hugely. During the golden age of the Caliphate, Jewish culture experienced its own golden age. Jews were prominent in trade, medicine, administration, scholarship, really flourishing. But their situation could become precarious, especially under the stricter regimes later on.
This mix must have created a vibrant cultural scene, particularly in language and literature.
Absolutely vibrant. You had multiple languages coexisting, Andalusi Arabic, various Romance dialects that were evolving towards Spanish and Portuguese, Hebrew, Berber languages. And this interaction sparked innovation.
Like in Hebrew poetry.
Exactly. The sources talk about a revolution in Hebrew poetry during this period. Poets like Samuel Hanagid and Solomon ibn Gabirol adopted the sophisticated meters and themes of Arabic poetry to write in Hebrew, leading to this incredible flourishing.
And Arabic poetry itself changed in Al-Andalus.
Yes, significantly. One of the major innovations was the muwasha. It's a complex strophic song form, meaning it has repeating stanzas with a set rhyme scheme, often ending in a final couplet called a kharja, which was sometimes in the local Romance dialect.
So mixing languages within the poem itself?
Sometimes, yes, it was incredibly influential. This form, with its intricate structure and often romantic themes, is thought to have migrated north and influenced the development of poetry in southern France, particularly the songs of the troubadours.
Another example of that cultural transmission changing Europe.
A very direct one, influencing European lyric poetry.
Okay, so with all this interaction, shared cities, trade, linguistic borrowing, people often talk about la convivencia, the coexistence. How accurate is that picture, really? Was it always peaceful coexistence?
It's complicated. And it definitely wasn't static across 800 years. The Golden Age under the Umayyad Caliphate probably came closest to that ideal, with relatively high levels of tolerance and fruitful interaction, especially for the Jewish community.
But it wasn't always like that.
Definitely not. Things deteriorated significantly at times. There were episodes of violence, like anti-Jewish riots and massacres in Granada in 1066, and tolerance levels really plummeted under the more fundamentalist regimes.
Particularly the Almohads.
Yes, the Almohads were the harshest. They came to power in the mid-12th century with a very rigid interpretation of Islam. They essentially offered non-Muslims, Christians, and Jews a stark choice: convert to Islam, leave, or face death.
That must have caused huge disruption.
Massive waves of immigration. Many Jews and Mozarabic Christians fled. The family of the great Jewish philosopher Maimonides, for example, had to flee Cordoba during this period, eventually settling in Egypt. So convivencia is really too simple a term. It masks a lot of variation in periods of intense persecution.
And while we're on the complexities, the sources also mention certain social practices among the elite, particularly outside those stricter periods.
Yes, that's worth noting for a complete picture. During the more, let's say, relaxed periods, particularly under the Umayyads and some of the Taififa rulers, the elite court culture could be quite hedonistic.
Meaning?
Well, the sources mention the open practice of homosexuality and sometimes pederasty, especially among rulers and the court circle. Figures like Abd al-Rahman III himself are recorded as openly keeping male favorites.
And this shows up in the poetry, too.
It does. Anthologies from the time contain quite a bit of homoerotic poetry. It seems to have been an accepted, if perhaps confined to the elite, part of the culture during certain times, contrasting sharply with the austerity imposed later by the Almoravids and especially the Almohads.
Okay, so a very complex picture socially and politically, but despite all that turmoil, the architectural legacy, that's something solid, enduring, and universally admired.
Oh, absolutely breathtaking. It's probably the most visible legacy of Al-Andalus today. The Mosque Cathedral of Cordoba is just stunning. The sheer scale of that hypostyle hall with its forest of columns and those famous double-tiered arches in red and white. It's a masterpiece of Umayyad architecture.
And then later, the Alhambra in Granada, built by the Nasrids, the last dynasty.
The Alhambra is just magical, perched on that hill overlooking Granada. Yes, built mainly by the Nasrids from the 13th century onwards.
What should people really look for when they see the Alhambra? Beyond its location, it's the decoration, isn't it?
It's all about the intricate interior decoration, the incredibly detailed geometric tile work, the carved plaster, the beautiful courtyards with their fountains, like the Court of the Lions, and especially the muqarnas.
Ah, those sort of stalactite-looking ceiling decorations.
Exactly. That complex three-dimensional honeycomb or stalactite sculpting used in domes and vaults. It's incredibly sophisticated and creates this ethereal effect. The Alhambra really is the jewel of Nasrid art, the high point of Islamic architecture in the West. past.
And incredibly, that aesthetic, that style, it didn't just disappear when Granada fell in 1492.
No, it persisted. You get the Mudejar style. This is where Christian patrons, after the Reconquista, continued to hire Muslim craftsmen or craftsmen trained in the Islamic tradition.
So they incorporated those Islamic designs into new Christian buildings.
Precisely. You see it in the intricate brickwork, the tile mosaics, the wooden ceilings with complex geometric patterns, the horseshoe arches sometimes, buildings like the Alcázar of Seville, parts of which were rebuilt by Christian kings in this style, are prime examples. It creates this unique Spanish architectural hybrid, a testament to that lingering cultural fusion.
Which brings us neatly to the end of Al-Andalus as a political entity. Granada, the last Muslim stronghold, falls in 1492 to the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella.
The very same year Columbus sails, yes. A pivotal year. And the aftermath. Well, it's quite tragic, really. Initially, the terms of surrender guaranteed Muslims the right to practice their religion.
But those guarantees didn't last long.
They were quickly eroded and then completely overturned. By 1502, all Muslims in Castile were ordered to convert to Catholicism or leave. Those who converted became known as Moriscos.
And they remained a distinct group.
Yes, often viewed with suspicion, accused of secretly practicing Islam. They faced persecution and discrimination for over a century until, finally, between 1609 and 1614, they were expelled en masse from Spain. A brutal end to centuries of Muslim presence.
So, looking back over this vast expanse of time, nearly 800 years, what's the ultimate takeaway? What was the lasting impact of Al-Andalus beyond beautiful buildings?
I think its most profound legacy lies in that role as an engine of transmission. It took classical knowledge, fused it with advancements from the Islamic world, Persia, India, and then crucially funneled it back into Europe.
The philosophy, the science.
Exactly. The sophisticated philosophy of Averroes, which challenged European thinkers, the advanced medical and surgical knowledge of Al-Zarawi, practical mathematics, the Hindu-Arabic numeral system we still use.
Much easier than Roman numerals.
Infinitely. Plus, sophisticated astronomical instruments like the astrolabe, advanced agricultural techniques, all this knowledge provided crucial fuel for the European Renaissance. It's hard to imagine it happening quite the same way without the contributions channeled through Al-Andalus.
And maybe a final thought for our listeners to consider, something provocative perhaps.
Well, despite the centuries of conflict, conquest, reconquest, forced conversions, expulsions, the story isn't just one of separation. The sources point towards something more integrated, perhaps even on a biological level.
You mean genetically?
Yes. Modern genetic studies of populations in Spain and Portugal consistently show a significant level of North African ancestry. One study put the average at around 10.6%.
Wow, that's quite substantial.
It is. And it suggests that, despite the religious and political boundaries, there was a high degree of mixing and integration over the long term, whether through voluntary conversion, forced conversion, or just people living side by side for centuries. It hints that the cultural and human boundaries were perhaps far more porous than the political narrative alone might suggest, a lasting imprint.
A fascinating layer to add to this already complex history. Thank you for guiding us through that.
My pleasure. It's an endlessly rich topic.